Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about Volume 9, Episode 2 of RWBY. Before we get started, big spoiler warning. If you've not watched RWBY Volume 9, Episode 1, or you haven't watched RWBY in general, there's obviously going to be some spoilers for Episode 1, Episode 2, and old RWBY content. So make sure you go watch that first. So jumping right into it, this is a review / recap like it was last time. And we're going to be looking at a lot of dialogue. It's a very dialogue-heavy episode, so stick with me. I'm loving it so far. So we start this episode out with Team RWBY trying to comprehend their various states of disbelief over potentially being in a fairy tale. RWBY, during this whole exchange that's mostly between Weiss, Blake, and Yang, as it has been in episode 1. She sounds so lifeless and hollow right off the start, and hurts seeing her like that. I miss Happy RWBY, but she'll get there. She'll get through this. During this whole recap, Weiss once again refuses to believe that they are in a fairy tale. But during this, Miss Weiss, logical Schnee, refuses to believe that they could possibly be in a fairy tale, and recaps what has happened up to this point in the narrative, with each step becoming more and more absurd. And the icing on the cake comes when Yang reveals that her arm was stolen by a talking raccoon riding a purple wagon filled with trash. This line breaks Weiss. She genuinely cannot believe that they could be in a fairy tale, despite what even little logic is left is pointing just to that. And from an outside point of view, it's pretty humorous that she can't believe that they could possibly be in a fairy tale or some kind of fairy tale-esque world, considering they have found out in their own world at Remnant that fairy tale stories are real. The group continues to talk, and then within this talk, Blake realizes that the story that they are in is the one of the girl who fell through the world, or Remnant's version of Alice in Wonderland. Blake is, of course, highly familiar with this story, as she is the resident bookworm, but the other three show knowledge of it as she recaps this world's version of Alice in Wonderland, and their Alice is named Alex, so I'll be referring to her as such the rest of this time. So Blake recaps the story, and Yang jumps halfway in to recap the final half, and you realize that the part that Blake was recapping has been exactly what has happened to Team RWBY. Meeting a mouse, getting caught in vines, having an item stolen by the talking raccoon. And I love that in this moment, I love that Yang seems to know the story just as well as Blake. And I don't know if this was done intentionally, but to me, it kind of gives a little nod to the fact that Yang used to read bedtime stories to RWBY when they were growing up. And so, it kind of makes sense that she would know it pretty well, because it might be a story she read to RWBY a lot. So I like that little potential detail. And then after talking, they decide the next course of action is to go after the talking raccoon that has Yang's arm, and potentially other missing items. Maybe Crescent Rose? Instead of just skipping to finding the raccoon, we actually get a little bit of their journey to this town they're going to. And it's really awesome because we get some time to make some nice character dynamics present in Volume 9. In these dynamics, one of the first things that is started to be established in episode 1, but it's going to continue as we move forward into the volume, that Blake wants to follow the story literally by the book. But in doing so, she wants to avoid mistakes Alex made in the process. She does not want to be a carbon copy of Alex, but she does want to follow the story plotline by plotline. And in doing so, we get this little piece of dialogue that definitely shows where Blake, Yang, and Weiss are at in their mentalities of how they think about this story. And it kind of shows light onto how they were raised and who they are as people. And I think it's really, really cool. So Blake says, "We need to be careful. Alex didn't know the customs and ended up starting a war among the townsfolk. Trouble followed her everywhere she went. Yang responds, well, yeah, but she was kind of a mean person, right? She lied and cheated her way through most of the book. And Weiss pipes up, she was trying to survive. And of course, there was no input from RWBY again. But this little exchange, it's so small, but it really gets into the character's headspace, as I was mentioning earlier. So Blake sees Alex as someone who didn't intentionally cause harm, but it followed her anyway. And this mirrors a lot about how she feels about her own past, and why she feels so strongly the need not to repeat Alex's mistakes, not to repeat her own past mistakes. Yang sees Alex as a bad person. This isn't how she sees herself per se, but she does very much believe bad things happen to bad people, and since they're the good guys, it should be fine, right? And Weiss sees Alex as a survivor, which is how she sees herself. She had to do things that she was not proud of growing up in the Schnee family, but she survived. And that's what mattered. And ultimately, RWBY staying out of the conversation continues to highlight her struggle with self and depression. While they're walking, they start to ask Little about this talking raccoon, since Little does live here. And we get a line that's important later on in the episode, and setting up maybe even more chaos in the future. Little says, steal? Never. They just take the things we aren't looking at. Fair's fair. The group continues to walk down the path, and the question comes up of how Yang's arm was even stolen in the first place. And we learn that the raccoon took it while Yang was unconscious from the fall. And this leads to a beautiful moment. More bees! In which we get Blake down bad, belladonna, blatantly flirting with Yang about the situation and even making some puns. We get an almost handhold. You clearly can see that they both wanted to. We wanted them to too. And then the very flirty delivery of how disarming from Blake. And that broke the fandom. Rightfully so. Aaron Zetch, you woman. really killing those line deliveries this season. While watching the bees, much like the rest of the fandom, Weiss looks on fondly, and she says, about time. RWBY doesn't notice. While the bees continue on, talking about who knows what, RWBY decides to try and comfort Weiss. And she says, don't worry, we'll find a way out of here. Then we'll go back home. And this line is so important because the delivery of it, the voice acting in general is super good this volume, but delivery of this line does not even sound like she believes in what she's saying. This is just RWBY once again playing the part of the leader, the part she was assigned in Beacon. She herself doesn't even believe they're going to be able to make it home. Or even when they do make it home, what now? You still have to fight an immortal fucking god. Not a good time, that's for sure. But thinking about home sends Weiss into a spiral, perhaps giving her the realization that she hadn't been able to make due to all the craziness going on. And I like this again. This is good filmmaking. We, the viewers, once again do not get to see Weiss's face as she breaks down. And I really like it because I really do believe it's tied to image and perception and self-perception, as so much of this volume is already, is already laying out to be. Weiss is used to being seen as perfect, and they don't want the viewer to see them as less. Building up to a bigger break maybe in the future for Weiss. And then we get a little exchange between Weiss and RWBY. I've condensed the lines a little bit so I could talk about them, but this is basically the gist. Weiss, there's nothing left for me to go back to. RWBY, you did the best you could for Atlas. Weiss, but it wasn't enough. Weiss. Maybe John and Winter were able to get them out. During the last line, during the maybe John and Winter were able to get them out, talking about the people that they were trying to get through between worlds from Atlas to Vacuo, is like a moment of a little bit of hope. And during that line, the shot focuses on Little. Once again, we're not seeing Weiss, we're seeing Little there, though. And, Little definitely represents the little hope they have left, as Weiss thinks maybe a slightly hopeful thought. And then we have another moment of Ruby's feelings affecting the weather. That's just going to keep coming up, I guess. So, every time it's going to come up, I'm going to mention it. So they get to this town, and they find the raccoon. And Yang's immediate response is she wants to hit him and hit him hard. To which Blake responds, in the book, Alex had to barter. Yeah, I think I'd rather hit him. And during this moment, I would like to just acknowledge Blake casual touch belladonna. I am so proud of her. The raccoon then appears. And his name is Jinxie. Upon seeing his appearance, Blake immediately comments that he looks a lot older than she remembers him being in the book. So is this a tip that something is off and this is not just a story, it is more like a realm? Or maybe the story world changes slightly to accommodate the people playing the part of Alex. Jinxie, the raccoon, then brings out 3 items for auction: a bunny jar, a scepter, and a little green figure. In which we learn from Blake that Jinxie disguises items as something else to try to make them seem more valuable. So Yang's trying to figure out which one's her arm, and Blake says, "What does your heart tell you?" To which we get suffering Weiss in the background. And Yang's replies, I mean, that one looks roughly arm-sized-ish, and talking about the scepter. Which, definitely is leaning towards Yang has no attachment to her arm. It's not really a part of her. She's lost it once before. It's the prosthetic. So we're getting on some psychological stuff for sure. On the flip side, we get some emotion out of RWBY that's not just depression this episode. RWBY feels a pull towards the little green figure. And as she's locked onto this figure, we are then launched into a discussion about what it is you can trade for items, because money is not a thing in the ever after, which is what this world's called. Blake informs them that for Alex, the price was her saddest and happiest memory. For a random citizen that got the bunny jar, in this case scenario, it was a hug, which, according to Little, are very powerful in this realm. And from Yang, it was knowing what it is to feel love. The knowledge of feeling love, which is complicated. And it's like, that escalated. Yang hesitates and loses the bid for her potential arm to a guard. And there's so many possible reasons, and most likely a combination of them is why she hesitates. Yang does not want to give up the knowledge of love from her late mother, Summer, who passed away. Well, missing in combat for a long time, most likely passed away. But who knows? RWBY's always cooking up some crazy stuff. Nor does she maybe want to give away that feeling that she gets from Blake. Also, Yang had already given up that arm before out of love, and she'd do it again. But this is definitely setting up her arc this season to revolve around love and hopefully evolving into self-love and self-care. Please talk to this girl about her self-sacrificial tendencies. From RWBY, because RWBY bids on the little green figure, it is enough hope to fill a jar. and RWBY does not even have that. But it is interesting to note that when the jar is held up by Jinxie, it looks like the little green figures inside of it, which hints at what the truth of this figure might be, and it might be laced in hope. Now, remember when I was talking about Little, and I said this line's important later on? Well, it comes into play right here. While the depressing realization occurs that RWBY literally has no hope, not even enough to fill a jar that's like this big, Little takes the figure from the stage. Since Jinxie wasn't looking at it, in doing so, all the items change back to their actual forms. The figure that Little has turns into one of Penny's swords. R.I.P. nuts and bolts. This change in items starts a riot, as the Jinxie is clearly a cheat and a lie. Yang gets her arm back, but has to shoot the guard to do so, and they decide to run out. But in them leaving town, we once again get to see the duality of Blake, Weiss, and Yang. Yang runs out with a grin like a menace while showing off her arm. Once again, repressing her traumas and her feelings and covering it up with a smile, as she always does. Blake is stressed as hell, since they have once again done something similar to Alex. And she is stressed and trying to get RWBY out of there. And Weiss, unbothered, she's just casually strolling as she tries to maintain her poise. Meanwhile, RWBY's standing at the stage, clutching Penny's sword to her chest like a lifeline. They escape the town and stop to figure out what's next. RWBY sits down next to Blake. RWBY, I can't explain why, but I was just drawn to it, talking about the sword. R.I.P. nuts and bolts, may you live on. At this point, cue rain. RWBY's emotions once again affecting the weather. Weiss suggests leaving, and suggests is putting it nicely. She kind of demands they leave since they know the tree's the way out and she can point to it. She can see it. It seems straightforward. Blake tries to warn her otherwise by saying, I don't think it's going to work like that in the book. Weiss,
we are not in a book.
And even if we were, we know how it ends. Right over there. To which the other three watch. Well, RWBY's not watching. RWBY's focus is solely on Penny's sword. But the other two watch as Weiss tries to walk to the tree with no prevail as she gets stuck in a loop, like RWBY did earlier. She ends up getting mad, throws a rock, and smacks herself in the back of the head with it. In which case we hear off screen the guards saying, this way someone's sad. This is important. It's such a small detail, but it definitely equates that the ever after doesn't just react to RWBY, but I think to strong emotions in general. It's just the other three have not had as such strong emotions as RWBY has. RWBY's really going through it, you know? The others are going through it in different ways, but RWBY's just violently going through it. So the guards show up, and Yang immediately takes a fighting stance, causing the guards to cower. Which, I guess considering this is a children's story, the potential violence from the huntresses is much more than what usually persists. The guards want to take Team RWBY as prisoners, since Yang stole her arm back, because, I mean, technically, the guard did win the arm. This launches RWBY to offer up Penny's sword in place, and then in this case, we get a eulogy for Penny that RWBY delivers, and here it is. What if I offered you something better? The weapon of a powerful warrior. Not just a powerful warrior, the most powerful to ever live. She was touched by magic, and she gave her life for thousands. She took a message of hope to the stars, and she saw the world through better eyes. This eulogy from RWBY is pretty interesting because it's not too personal. Like, you start to get it towards the end, but the beginning is very much not personal at all. And it's certainly not a eulogy you would give to a close friend. So RWBY is pushing her feelings away, isolating them. I think it's going to certainly lead to some interesting build-up later on. So upon hearing this, the guards cry, and they agree to take them to the birthday party. As they are leaving, RWBY turns towards the others. I say we follow it, and stop pretending we know what we're doing. So unlike RWBY. And it's good. She's grieving. It makes sense. But this is the most serious and deadpan and low-key scolding RWBY has ever been to the rest of her team. Ever. So the other three share a look, but follow quickly after. And since RWBY is bottling up all of these emotions, this grief, and repressing everything, I honestly would not be surprised to see more moments like this in the future. This wasn't really lashing out quite yet, but I would not be surprised if we didn't get some of that as it continues to go on, as she continues to suffer. So yeah, this volume is setting up grief as a huge plot point and overcoming it and dealing with it, and the different ways people handle grief and repress grief. And I'm really excited to see where it's going. So far, I'm loving the character dynamics, the character interactions, the dialogue. I mean, I could sit here and pick apart every script even more, but I don't want this to be a 2-hour-long video. So thank you so much for joining me. I will see you next week for episode 3. And yeah, we'll just keep rolling. You can watch RWBY on Crunchyroll. So until next time, have a good one.